But that night, she went on social media and made some very inappropriate post on Instagram about, guns versus being poisoned and scalded and placed in a bucket to die, and didn't name names, but she didn't need to, right? I knew she was talking about me.
And welcome back to Dear Jane. Scott Baker here and Marcy Little there. How are you, Marcy?
Doing great.
So the power of stories. You're somebody who follows that very, very much, very closely. As each day in the movement, I'm becoming increasingly convinced that it's going to be stories that are going to change the hearts and minds of people in our society.
Yeah, I mean, it was stories that kicked off the whole abortion movement. And sadly, most of those stories were fake. And that kind of captured the imagination and hearts and minds of Americans. They, felt compassion. They were moved by these stories. And unfortunately, they were misled and lied to. So I think that's something powerful that our side should consider more and utilize more. I'm excited to talk to today's guest about a new storytelling initiative that I think is going to really help impact what we're doing in the pro-life movement.
For sure. Before we get to Melissa Ohden with Abortion Survivors Network, don't forget to hit subscribe. Don't forget to like. You can make comments. You can leave comments, I should say. You can tell your friends, please. Tell your friends about Dear Jane. Let's help spread the word. We've been really enjoying some of our conversations. We have some of the big movers and shakers in the movement, but then even some people who, might be considered on the fringe of the movement. That's probably the ones we love the most. But anyway, make sure you spread the word, and we appreciate that. And you can check us out on all the socials. So there's a new effort of storytelling called My Body, My Voice, and it's something that is being spearheaded by Melissa Ohden from the Abortion Survivors Network. That's who we visit with today on Dear Jane.
Melissa, thanks so much for joining us today on Dear Jane.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know we have chatted with you a lot. A lot of people are probably familiar with your story. You are an abortion survivor, and I am curious, what are some of the common misconceptions that people have about abortion survivors?
Man, I need to do like an updated top 5, top 10, top 50. I find this even in the pro-life movement, Marcy, is that I think, I don't want to use the word desensitized, but I think people tend to see and hear those words and they think they know what it means. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's like the number one misconception is people think they know what it means and they really don't know what it means. So the reality is, I think people think of a handful of us who are very public with our stories of surviving an abortion procedure. But the reality is babies survived procedures before Roe. Many of us survived during Roe, and babies are still surviving abortions today. Mm-hmm. And everybody's experience is unique. We're talking every gestation, every type of method. You see varying lengths of pregnancy. You see varying degrees of, are you placed for adoption like me or Claire Colwell or Josiah Presley, or are you raised in your biological family? And for me, I always kind of shock people when I say most survivors are raised in their biological family. Mm-hmm. So there are just so many misconceptions. And, I think that's why it's so important that we do the work that we all do collaboratively together, because we need to share the stories and the information even in our own movement, so people know how to talk about this.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine a lot of people think abortion survivor, and they think the woman who had an abortion. So I would think that's a common misconception. So talk to us a little bit about the Abortion Survivors Network, the people that you work with, and how do we know how common it is that people would survive an abortion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really hard to get to because, as you guys know, we don't have great abortion data in the United States. So if we don't have good abortion data, we most certainly don't have good survivor data. Mm-hmm. And so, we saw this was a big issue, as it should be, in the last presidential election with Governor Tim Walz because of Minnesota's history on Born Alive and them repealing it, which is something I see happen quite frequently when they, allow for abortion unrestricted, unregulated, they also strip Born Alive protection. And that's when I want people to put on their critical thinking caps with us and say, oh, that's weird. Why
Mm-hmm.
would they do that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we know why they do that, because late term abortion begets itself to a greater opportunity of born alive infants. So none of that is a coincidence. But, we have a few sources of really good data that I think are really mind blowing for most people. And you can go to our website, abortionsurvivors.org. We have a new spot on it where you can drill down resources and you can come face to face with all of the data. And some of the most powerful was actually even published by ACOG this year, which is like you're going, what? Why
Wow.
would ACOG? Well, the reason why ACOG, who supports abortion, would actually publish some pretty damning evidence on born alive infants, the reason why they were publishing it is because they were talking about essentially how do you prevent that from happening so much? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
how should you best deliver feticide to lower the incidence of born alive infants? So that particular piece of research, you guys, if you haven't seen it, did a retrospective study of about 32 years in Quebec alone, sample size of nearly 14,000. And in it, it had an about 11.2% failure rate of second trimester abortions, not third,
Mm.
second. And
Wow.
when you look through that research, you will find about like 25%, a little under 25% made it to the NICU, which, I mean, this is heartbreaking to say, but I thought that's higher than what I expected it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But that's abysmal, right? That's not how we treat fellow human beings. But I know too much. And so that is a very interesting statistic. And for me, I think one of them that was the most interesting is, we have a lot of legislators, Scott, who you and I know say, hey, sorry, Melissa, that happened to you, but, that doesn't happen anymore because essentially,
Hmm.
right, we've learned that people like you, we found other ways to make sure that you don't live to tell your story. But when you read through that research, what you find is that the number has continued to climb.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
the number is getting greater instead of
Mm.
smaller. So it is still an issue.
Mm.
Something I've heard you say before that I think is pretty powerful is abortion survivors are one of the few victims groups that are told to shut up. What do you mean by that?
We've gone through these different movements in our culture of, the Me Too and believe all women and trust all women. And I'm with her, except there's never a movement of like, oh yeah, I'm with them, right?
Mm.
It's like, yes, every woman's voice matters, except if your experience with abortion is inconvenient to the cultural narrative. If it is, sit down, shut up, and we're actually going to do everything in our power to make sure you are unseen and unheard. And that is abortion survivors, that is the women whose abortions fail, right? Because every behind every abortion survivor is a woman
Hmm.
whose abortion didn't go the way she planned it to. And I don't know if you guys have followed this in that news article recently that came out from the New York Times about Planned Parenthood and their botched abortions and all the
Mm.
craziness going down there. One of the stories was of a woman, and I think her name was Nakara. I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but she had an abortion at 8 weeks at Planned Parenthood. And like so many of the women we serve at the Abortion Survivors Network, she left Planned Parenthood believing it was successful. We know what that means. And later she delivered the baby at about
Wow.
12 weeks, and baby ended up passing away. This abortion survivor passed away because of premature birth. And I don't know if that baby also had injuries, but clearly this is something that Planned Parenthood doesn't want to talk about. And women deserve to know the truth.
Mhm. It's amazing in an age where we talk about informed consent and understanding what you're getting into and all the medical procedures you're going to be a part of, that so much of that information is hidden. And again, kind of feels sinister to even say, but the more you dig into Planned Parenthood and the other abortion providers, it's like, oh yeah, of course they wouldn't want survivors talking about, what they survived and how they survived. I would imagine that makes it difficult for survivors to tell their stories. What is that like in your experience, and why is it still important for survivors to share?
Yeah, most survivors don't share their story publicly.
Mhm.
And, there's lots of reasons for that. It may be, they were raised in their biological family, and so there is not healing. There's an
Mhm.
expectation that you don't share this story, or you're waiting for other people to kind of catch up with you in your own healing. We see that a lot. But I've seen really amazing things happen when that survivor heals and then they start to share their story, and those family members who maybe were fearful ultimately achieve a different level of healing and start finding their own voice as well. So, I mean, that's one of the coolest things I get to see. But yeah, whether it's, family circumstance, they're afraid of losing their job,
Mhm.
they're afraid of, public vitriol. It is, I think for me, that's probably one of the saddest things is that as survivors, we are sort of ingrained to not trust people and not trust the world because of the attempt on our life. And then we are raised in this culture that really attacks us, right? Or denies our existence, which is an attack in and of itself. And so for me, I see the greatest continued compounded concerns for survivors because we live in a culture that silence and shames the way that it does. So, for me, it is kind of a twofold situation. I want survivors to be able to share their story because there's a level of empowerment that comes in having a voice. And I've seen such really amazingly beautiful things happen when people kind of come as survivors and say, I'm never sharing my story. And I go, cool. You don't have to. You have a place here, right? We have an online community. You belong here, and if you want to share your story, cool. We're happy to support you in that. And then they start to share their story and realize, oh gosh, that actually sort of feels a little bit good, and it didn't kill me. And there's purpose, right? There's such incredible purpose when we know that tens of millions of babies are not as fortunate as we are. So, yeah, there's a level of healing that happens for survivors and families, and such public good that comes from it. We shouldn't have to tell our story so that people understand that abortion ends a human life,
Right.
but we have to currently.
You talked about the vitriol that you can run into. Have you ever told your story and been called a liar?
Oh yeah, yeah. To my face. I mean, I've had some pretty epic showdowns, if I'm being honest, Scott. I don't know if you and I have ever swapped war stories, but probably one of the worst ones was, oh man, I think it was about 2019. Christina Bennett, who's with Live Action now, she and I testified in a, essentially they were trying to push through women's health, which is not women's health, but there was a Hollywood actress, Busy Phillips, I think is her name. I might
Mhm.
be getting it wrong. You guys would know it. But she had had, I think, two abortions, and her pain was palpable. That is always really difficult for me to sit at a table with abortion witnesses who you can tell are just wounded. And yet here we are. And so, in the middle of that whole exchange, Representative Louis Gohmert from Texas was essentially asking her the question, so, like, when did this witness, Melissa Ohden, when did her right to life begin? When did she achieve bodily autonomy? And this Hollywood actress is stumbling right over her words. And he finally just shut her down and said, we know the answer to that. You can't answer. Moving on. And tension, right? Cut like a knife. And she did not say a whole lot that day. And when she passed by me, I was trying to be very gracious and say hello. I always do that, no matter what. And she did not respond to me. But that night, she went on social media and made some very inappropriate post on Instagram about, guns versus being poisoned and scalded and placed in a bucket to die, and didn't name names, but she didn't need to, right? I knew she was talking about me.
Wow.
And I think for me, that's where, like, I'm the mama bear of the abortion survivors. I will take it on the chin. I will boldly make comments, even to members of Congress, calling them out for dehumanizing us. I always still try to manage a level of grace in that maybe they don't ever show us. But yeah, I'm gonna go after that because it may not feel personal to me anymore, but I will not allow them to do that to my population of people.
Yeah.
I'm having to look up who Busy
I might have the name
No, you
wrong.
got that's
Is
actually a
it?
person. Yeah,
Yeah, it is.
I've never heard of her.
She had quite the following.
Yeah.
But that was pretty epic. And I still run into Representative Gomert from time to time, and I still kind of shake my head at him and go, I can't, you were just epic in that hearing. But that's what we all need. We all need somebody to give us a voice and fight for us and ask a very simple question. If you're going to come in and give that line about your bodily autonomy as a woman, then what about my bodily autonomy? I mean, am I like the weirdest outlier ever in the world that every other woman has the same bodily autonomy except for women like you, Melissa? That is something different. Like, what is that?
Yeah. Well, you make a good point. And the problem is we've allowed people to operate under slogans and just get away with slogans and not really talk about what abortion is, not talk about what the issue is. A slogan that a lot of people are probably familiar with is "My Body, My Choice." You are part of an initiative that is shaking that up a little bit and changing it and flipping the narrative. Tell us about "My Body, My Voice."
I love that slogan so much. I really do. I sort of pinch myself sometimes and go, where have we been? But at the same time, right, the timing is just everything. Yeah, it's one of those things where I've always been super passionate about using stories to educate people and change hearts and minds. And we all know the importance of it and how it's activates various parts of the brain to understand information in a new way. And for me, it's always been really important that survivors' voices be a part of that, and also the moms and the families affected. And people tend to see survivors show up in various campaigns, but I'm super passionate about laying the groundwork day in and day out that says, here are the stories, here are the voices, and through it, you have the opportunity to enter in and experience abortion maybe in a way that you've never understood. And so that's what My Body, My Voice is really about, is saying, first of all, those words, my body, my choice, no. Time has come. We're going to stop this right here and we're going to reclaim them. Those words do not belong to them.
Yeah.
Bodies and voices belong to people, and not just the people whose stories fit the narrative of abortion. This is a place for anyone whose experience is typically inconvenient to the narrative. So we've started that with our friends over at Choose Life Marketing. And this is what, to me, it's all about, is empowering those who know a different story about abortion and giving them the opportunity to share it. And I can tell you, for the survivors who have already taken part, their feedback has been phenomenal. Just they can't say enough good things about what it felt like to be seen and heard, even by videographers who say, you know what, your story matters and your voice needs to be heard. And I want to listen. And then I'm going to use my skills to bring it to other people so they can hear it too. So that in and of itself is such a change agent. And then we take it and have you guys do what you do well, and ASN do what we do well, which is supporting survivors and mothers and families and sharing the background information about it all. And this is how we change our culture. We take back the words that don't belong to the abortion industry and directly challenge the words that have gone unchallenged, Marcy. The my body, my choice. No, it's time to hear about other people's bodies and their voices as well.
I'm one of those who start hearing stats and things like that. And I just start to glaze over it and just whatever numbers and all these sorts of things. And I understand some people really appreciate that, could really dig in and really can make a case using numbers. But stories, it's hard to hear a story and not be moved. That's what's going to change hearts and minds. I think it's hard to even in some of these videos to you can look into the eyes of these people, and it's hard to deny the authenticity of what they're saying. So I think that's what we need to do better, even as a movement, is just telling stories that the other side you can't get past them because they are so real.
Yeah, and share the story and then right invite the conversation that says, "Hey, family member that I know supports abortion. At some point I'd love to talk about how this person's experience fits with what you believe about abortion. And hey, church that doesn't want to talk about abortion, could we talk about the story of this 79-year-old abortion survivor in the My Body, My Voice movement who was born alive in an abortion clinic, whose family probably suffered with shame and silence, and who, as a 79-year-old woman, has suffered in her own ways and multiple losses, loves Jesus, but needs to go to a church where she can feel supported as someone who survived an abortion? Can we talk about this, guys? And I really feel like that's one of the coolest parts of this whole movement is it is a movement and it doesn't belong to just one organization. Yes, we are drivers of it, but we see the importance for our entire movement and our entire culture. And so this is something that we want to use all of our combined gifts and talents to give to our culture and to the movement to say, here, take this and do good with it, wrestle with it. And we can change people's lives, even the people already impacted by abortion through it as well. That's like the biggest set of wins I can ever think of.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of cool things, y'all, but I've probably never been as excited about something as this.
Yeah. So tell us more. The campaign was launched with several survivor stories, super well produced. I was so excited to see those. They've been really well engaged with online so far. What's next? What do you see? What are your goals for My Body, My Voice? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, so folks can check out those videos. YouTube really is the best place for them to see that. They'll see some familiar faces already. We kind of did that purposely because people tend to want to gravitate to people they know. But then we also want to introduce them to new survivors and mothers and other folks. So, yeah, Josiah and Claire, people recognize them. But yes, we have this wonderful 79-year-old survivor, Karen, who is so brave in sharing her story. We also have the story of Jennifer, another twin, that will be coming out soon. And there's a lot of surprises in Jen's story that I want people to really listen to. Because that's the other thing, right? Our stories may seem unrelatable to people until they actually listen. And then they realize we have more in common with them than we do different. And so I think that's really the tie that binds us. So yeah, what's next? We want to share the stories of, women who have experienced their abortion that has failed, or maybe they stopped it, that resulted in ongoing pregnancy and live birth. This happens so often, and we have to let women know that they're not alone. And so we have an online community where biological moms connect. We also have an online community for adoptive parents. We need to let people know that there's a place to go and, again, inform the public at the same time. But I think the part that I'm super excited about every time I've been talking about it lately, you guys, is everybody has a story and everybody wants to be heard and everybody wants purpose to come from their pain. And so, we know lots of folks who were conceived in rape and incest, or they conceived a child out of rape or incest. They were targeted for abortion because of, a perceived disability or diagnosis, or that, mom's life was maybe in danger, or the circumstances in the family were, we all know those things. We know that there are men who have lived with the great regret of abortion and haven't had space in our world to be able to share their story. Women who have regretted their abortion, right? The list goes on and on. Clinic workers, former abortionists, adoptive parents. This is a movement for everyone in the pro-life movement. Again, I think that's the thing that I've seen really missing over time is kind of this all-inclusive campaign that says every experience matters and every voice and story matters in the pro-life movement. It's not just abortion survivors.
Yeah.
Well, and you know what I love about the stories that have been released so far is, and you kind of referenced this earlier, no two are the same. You know, every you can't watch one and say, okay, I get the gist. Each one is so engaging and unique and has its own twists and turns, which one makes it just interesting and engaging to watch. But it really kind of gets to what you speak about on how everybody, I mean, there's just so many different angles and ways that people are impacted by this. I think if we can get people, if they can have the courage to tell their stories, I think we'll have an endless supply of stories, and that's how we'll start to change hearts and minds. How do you get people to take that scary step of really starting to speak about their life and their story?
Well, and there's a few ways we do it. So at the Abortion Survivors Network, we do have online trainings that survivors and moms and adoptive families can access with some of the, like sort of tips and tricks, right? How do you do this? But more importantly, how do you stay emotionally well? That's always been a huge part of what we do is if you're going to share your story, yes, we're going to help you, but we also very much care about you staying emotionally well in the midst of it. So that's something we distinctly offer. But I think one of the coolest things in the last year, is we've seen sort of God guiding multiple organizations to say, man, this is important. This is really important. Do you see it? Do you see it? Secular Pro-Life and the Leadership Institute worked with the Abortion Survivors Network, and we trained, oh man, like almost 230 people, I think, in this first quarter. And we did a set of webinars covering everything from, right, what is storytelling advocacy? And why is that important to a social justice movement? And what does that look like in the abortion industry? What do we need to learn from them? And one of the things people were really stunned by is the abortion industry and that movement is full of abortion storytelling organizations, right? Some of us pay attention to them. We tend to run into them sort of when we're testifying. Think We Testify, Grandmothers for Reproductive Freedom, Shout Your Abortion. The list is lengthy and long. And that is sort of the process by which the life cycle continues in the abortion movement is they have an open gate and all these advocacy organizations. And that's one of those areas that we've been able to train leaders and grassroots people, whether they have a story or they care about stories. We've been able to train them and say, what's that look like in our own movement? We don't have a lot of that. Yes, we have a lot of organizations who serve and give voice, but most people have no idea where to go to share their story. And so we've been able to do lots of trainings and equip people and even had people on site at the Leadership Institute during the March for Life week. We had a communications coach, Dr. Heidi Petak, who has worked with us for years, who works with people on how to share their story. And then we help create opportunities. And this is, again, sort of part of the process. Yes, we need to do the My Body, My Voice campaign, but we also need to be training people on what this looks like, give them opportunities, create opportunities for them to be surrogates in the media, have other pro-life organizations sharing their story, right? We have a whole lot of gaps that we need to be filling, but this is the way that we do it.
What would you say to people who feel like they don't have a story, like they're passionate about this? I've thought about this a lot because it's like I don't technically have like an abortion story, but I do have a story of coming into the movement during the Kermit Gosnell trial and that completely flipping my understanding of women who have abortions, giving me so much compassion for them. So I feel like that's like a story for myself to share why I care about this issue and the women who are impacted by it. But what would you say for people who feel like they don't have a story? I haven't been impacted by abortion. What role can I play in storytelling in the pro-life movement?
I'll be really honest. My personal story, yes, is important to the pro-life movement, but that's not the part of me that's probably the most powerful. The most powerful thing about me is that I share other people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want people to recognize. You may feel like your story is not quote unquote important to the conversation, and that takes some, discerning and, probably has more importance than what people think it does. But at the end of the day, sharing other people's stories is what creates incredible change. I mean, why else do we see folks even in, presidential debates drop a story. It's not their story. They're sharing the story because they know that that story matters. So do better than some of the presidential candidates in that. Let's just say that, huh?
Yeah, I think a lot of people could probably do better.
There was some good ones and there were some, here we are.
Yeah, mixed bag. Well, if someone's listening, you're interested in helping share other people's stories and helping spread the word about My Body, My Voice, you can do that by going to mybody-myvoice.org. You can check out all the stories that are on there now. You can follow My Body, My Voice on all the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, X, formerly Twitter, and YouTube. You can see all the stories there. We have the long form stories, there are short form, more shareable stories, all there. We would love for people to get engaged and share those, get the word out, help us kind of break through these cultural narratives that exclude so many important stories that tell a different story about abortion and tell the truth about abortion. But Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today and for the work that you do. And we're excited about My Body, My Voice and all the different ways that that's going to take off.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Dear Jane.
You can follow along every day on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And make sure you also are subscribed so you never miss an episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube. Ring that bell so you're notified and you never miss an episode.